why your simplest marketing metrics matter, the importance of third-party validation, and when to bring an agency, consultant, or other outside perspective into your marketing organization. That and more on this episode of Advertising Influencers.
Advertising Influencers. Conversations with today's top-tier marketers from Silicon Valley and beyond. Powered by Instapage, the most powerful landing page solution.
Hey, how's it going? Hope you're doing very well whenever and wherever you are listening. My name is Ander. I'm the marketing educator here at Instapage, and welcome to our podcast, Advertising Influencers, where we speak with industry insiders about how to build successful brands and businesses, and how to break through the noise. Last episode, we spoke with two of the product marketing and growth professionals at Udemy, their VP of Product, Archie Abrams, and Growth Product Manager, Adam Levinson. And wow, those guys have so much to say about A/B testing and running experiments within digital marketplaces. So check it out when you have a chance. Today, however, we're speaking with Wynn White, an expert in marketing for early-stage B2B SaaS companies and a veteran of enterprise and mid-market B2B marketing here at Silicon Valley and around San Francisco. His career includes quite a few really impressive positions, including some senior, director, VP, and CMO level positions at Oracle, Birst, Druva, Oblix, and KACE, which was acquired by Dell in 2010. Wynn currently runs CMO Advisory Services, a boutique marketing consultancy that is accessible through word of mouth within his network. It's pretty exclusive, so you're really lucky to get to work with him. Some of his current clients include FloQast accounting software, Incorta, an enterprise business analytics tool, and he also sits on the board of Openprise, a data automation product for marketing and sales teams. We've got quite a lot to talk about, and I am quite excited to share this conversation with you. So let's go say hello to Wynn. So I've gotten the chance doing this podcast, Advertising Influencers, talking to all these different marketing influencers and thought leaders around the Bay Area and elsewhere for that matter. I've talked to some really interesting people, and it just so happens that my boss here at Instapage, VP of Marketing, Saranya Babu, happens to know a lot of these people, and that includes who I'm speaking to right now, Wynn White. Wynn, it is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming to our office.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here.
Wynn, there's a lot that we can talk about, but I think the best way to get started is just to hear about what you're doing now. I told the audience a little bit about what your focus is at the moment in the introduction to this interview, but let's hear it in your own words.
Okay. Well, actually, to answer that question, let me give you a little context. So
Sure.
When I got out of school, I went into marketing and tech, B2B tech. Spent about half my career at big companies. Frankly, actually learning the craft, right? 2 tours of duty at Oracle, and then afterwards went into my first startup and took over responsibility for marketing. And that was probably the biggest growing experience ever. It was a completely new world. I learned about all sorts of areas, which I had no clue about. Best way of learning is diving in the deep end right away. So I have then subsequently spent the second half of my career doing that again. And primarily at earlier stage organizations are looking to either scale or ramp their marketing or build it out. And basically, the niche I found is around amplification and growth.
Amplification. Can you define that for us quickly?
So amplification, I think, is the classic example when you have figured out who your target audience is, a little bit of your go-to-market cadence, and what you found repeatable in your business. And then you're looking to say, how do I expand that? How do I basically go from closing 2 or 3 deals this quarter to closing 20?
I see. What you're saying is almost like using the channels that you know are working and just making those a little bit more robust and stronger.
It certainly is that. I think, though, marketing at an earlier stage company, it's about kind of dialing in what is your value proposition and then how you take your solution to the market. And once you have found that pattern in your business and you found that something that you find to be repeatable, is then how do you scale that up? And so by scaling it up, that's from everything from trying to find that target and that audience that you're going at in larger volumes and trying to get more of your go-to-market process through the hole, if you will.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not the most eloquent of all the solutions, but yeah, it's running in parallel versus sequence. And a lot of organizations I deal with are still kind of taking that sort of sequential approach and looking at how do we actually move things in parallel so we can get the greater volume and then the greater scale overall.
Gotcha. So you spent time as an executive. Oracle, KACE, which was acquired by Dell, and you were at Dell for a little while after that.
About a year, a year and a bit.
Right. And now, from what I understand, it sounds like you're working with a number of earlier stage companies and helping them achieve that amplification that you're speaking about.
Absolutely. About a year ago, I decided, hey, I really enjoy that earlier stage. When I say early stage, I'm usually referring to post-seed, Series A type of funding. It's a very creative time at an organization, especially from a marketing, because you're figuring out the core. You're institutionalizing your message and how you tell your story. You're starting to set up your infrastructure and your channels to reach your audience, and you're putting together your various marketing programs. And so there's a stage there. It's actually a very critical stage because you need to ensure what you're building on is a super solid foundation. I've seen it time and time again where organizations haven't yet really got their messaging just right. They haven't really dialed in who's the person most apt to buy their solution product. They haven't quite figured out that go-to-market pattern. And they start to scale. They start investing in event strategies. They start investing in awareness, PR, which can get very pricey very quickly. They start scaling things up, and they realize that it's not exactly working the way they wished it would work. And so that's when they say, okay, look, we got to change things. And as soon as you start changing things after you start the scale, you have to basically go back to the basics and start to rebuild on top of that. So there's obviously a lot of cost associated with that, but probably the most important thing is lost time.
Yeah, no kidding. And it makes sense. If you're investing all this time, energy, and money into the wrong persona or a persona that's not as interested as maybe the perfect persona is, you're going to have to go back to square one in many ways.
You're always going to be dialing it in. I think the key is that when you're aiming at your target, maybe don't have to hit the bullseye, but at least you got to be hitting the target. And too many companies I've seen are not even quite hitting the target. They're coming close. But before you actually start putting the pedal to the metal and really investing, you got to have it at least hitting the back of the mat, right?
Yeah, for sure. How do you do that? Especially within these Series A post-seed SaaS organizations. There are so many products right now. I mean, just in marketing technology alone, I think there are over it's something like 4,000 different MarTech products out there. And some of them are obviously huge companies like Marketo. Some of them might be tiny little ones. Some of them might be in the explosive growth stage. But how do you identify that product market fit in that right persona when you're at that specific stage, that exciting creative stage? And this is a huge question. So however you want to answer that.
Okay, that is a very broad question, and it actually is applicable and different for what type of marketing tactics you're taking. So typically, from a marketing standpoint, you have your awareness leg, you have your demand generation leg, you have your enablement leg for more your own team, your own sales team. Before you start building out any of those, you got to have your story together. I've engaged with a couple companies where they've hired out individuals to basically go do demand generation before they've actually hired out kind of the product marketing function. You got to sequence those things. You got to start as figuring out your story and your market position and who you play against and why you're different and what makes you unique. That's really much more a classic product marketing focus than it is around a demand generation. The demand generation is really the scale side of the business. But to go back to your question, where do you start? Actually, you start with the hiring of the organization itself. It's not about technology. It's not about that. It's about who you're bringing on board and who you're bringing on first, followed by second, third, and through not. What I've advised the organizations with whom I work with, depending on what stage they are in their business, is bring on someone who can tell the story, who knows the market, knows the domain, and understands the players and the different dynamics that are happening in that space. Make that your first marketing hire. And a lot of times when I go into these businesses, that's kind of the role I'm sort of stepping into. I'm helping to define what that story is and defining what makes this story unique. But I'm not there in a full-time capacity. So
Right.
That's not going to last very long. It's a Band-Aid approach until we can get somebody on board. But that first person we're looking to bring on board is that person who tells the story, which is typically the product marketing function.
Right. The story is an interesting concept. I think when a lot of people hear the story behind a company or what the company's story is, they think when it started, the process to getting to where it is now. But it's not just that. Maybe you can elaborate on what that story really means.
For me, when I say the story, The story is about why you exist. Why was this company founded? Why should the company even be there for that day? And all kind of depends on what space you're in. I mean, if you're basically building a space, the first in the market in a space, and your competition is really not doing the same thing that you're doing, it's a very kind of different sort of sequencing and way you actually go about telling that story. But if you're in a space that's very crowded, and a lot of B2B startups tend to basically flock to spaces that are being funded at a given time. Typically you'll see Sequoia fund one person in a specific space, and you'll see Andreessen fund another. It's almost like a race. You'll see 3 or 4 companies get started around the same time, all chasing the same nut. And a lot of times those spaces, the messaging in terms of the benefit they're selling to their customer is oftentimes very similar. So when I talk about telling the story, it's really about why you're unique. What makes you different? Why should someone care? What you want to do is you want to be able to get that engagement. You want to get people to stop and lean in a little bit to basically say, okay, is that enough of interest for me to pursue to actually learn more? Mm-hmm. I mean, really, the top level message telling the story is that it's got to be credible. It's got to be believable. And then I think the third part about it is you also got to want, as much as possible, tug on emotion, kind of on the heartstrings, if you can.
Yes.
If you can get a combination of all 3 of those, you can actually have a pretty darn compelling message.
And after you have that compelling message, at that point, do you think you've established credibility, or is that something that comes later? Because I've seen companies before that the message is great. They've got this great thing going on. I'm totally intrigued. And then I found myself wondering, is this a real thing? Do these guys actually have their act together? Is this a legitimate business?
Yeah.
How do you create that?
And that's another thing. So much about working with the early stage companies is about sequencing how you go to market. Who's going to validate your claims that you're making? Who's going to validate the statements? They can be very bold, they can be very bombastic. But unless you have somebody else other than yourself saying that this is indeed what you're doing and it's indeed happening, or can have that result, the intended result, then the credibility is going to be lacking. So customers, probably the most important validation point. So having others telling your story. The bigger and the bolder the claim you can make, especially in a crowded space, the more attention you're going to achieve. But unless you have that third-party validation, you're not probably going to get much traction. Building up customer references for early stage companies is kind of a critical thing. And it's not just putting up a case study, but really using the customer validation to tell your story, putting out quotes on every single web page, on every piece of collateral, on your signage when you go to a show, that sort of thing. Also, third parties like analysts, they're key validation points, and or influencers, that people who are covering the space, covering it closely, maybe writing blogs, that sort of thing. The more you can have others tell your story on your behalf, the more credible and more impactful it's going to be.
Absolutely. And of course, telling your story, having your story nailed down, and then getting other people to tell that story, essential for your credibility. But at some point, we're going to have to advertise. Or maybe at some point, advertising is going to be the right thing for a specific organization. And it's tricky when you're early stage. You've got a set amount of money, you have a set amount of runway, and you got to make that money last. You have to make that money go towards the right things at the right time. And for some companies, experimenting with paid perhaps isn't the best thing for them at that moment in that stage of their growth. But there's going to be a point, perhaps, where advertising is going to dramatically multiply all the other marketing efforts that the company is engaging in. How do you identify when that time comes? And advertising is not just about, throwing up some AdWords campaigns or using display network. I mean, it's also about spending money on paid acquisition. Maybe it is a paid media placement or something else of that nature.
Right. This goes back to kind of the original discussion point about amplification and about scale. When you have that message nailed down, when you have your value proposition honed, when you understand your go-to-market procedures and methodologies and your personas all dialed in, that's when the amplification turns up. That's when you want to start really getting your message out to the market. I work with a lot of B2B enterprise technology companies, mostly SaaS players. For the most part, all funded. They have a little bit of a war chest there. But as they're starting to kind of scale, the areas which I almost immediately go to build that awareness are not your more traditional advertising. They're actually more of awareness mechanism. So a targeted PR strategy, a targeted analyst strategy, especially in B2B. Some of these large analysts such as Gartner, they're so influential. They can make or break a business, just based on how they're getting covered. Going to other third-party influencers in the market, either kind of a second or tertiary tier of analysts who may be active in blogging, that sort of thing. And then when you start looking at paid, I oftentimes try to blend it with some of the demand generation as well as an awareness. And so where do you have that kind of blended yield that's not just demand generation, but also gives you kind of that awareness piece? Events are a key one. Being present at those events, having the signage, having people know you're there, and then going online as well, like paid search. Paid search is a key thing. I would typically put paid search into my demand gen bucket, but you're right, it's an awareness mechanism as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I see a lot of companies do, very, very small companies, I mean, maybe these are even pre-seed companies, but a lot of times I find that there are some marketers who are looking at paid as this independent channel that operates kind of on its own, and then it feeds into the marketing automation or whatever else it might be. But it sounds like what you're saying is that when it's events, and well, honestly, whatever your marketing is, everything has to be in concert with the other channels, with each other.
Boy, does it ever. So, I mean, you have, as a marketeer, you've got a bunch of arrows. They're in your quiver on your back, and you want to be able to pull out your arrows. You want to be able to fire them, kind of a little bit one at a time. Ideally, you want to be able to fire them in parallel as well.
Sure.
But depending on kind of on the stage of the company, the arrows themselves can be relatively thin. But if you've got the right arrows in your quiver, then it's not a matter of firing different arrows as you scale and grow up. It's firing fatter arrows. So you have your online program, you have your event strategy, you have your database marketing, you have your various campaigns that you're running. But you're running these in coordination. One of the classic examples I always look at is I look at companies' press releases. When they make an announcement, maybe about a new product launch or something like that, how do they communicate that? Is it just a press release that gets dropped on the wire with some pitching and doing that? Or does the press release actually flow through to other various materials? Like, in other words, does it link them back to other assets that the individual who reads it can actually explore to learn more? Does it announce a webinar that's going to follow a week later that the person can actually go in there? Does it actually have a link to a gated paper or guide that's on the same subject matter that ties back? It's that integration that provides a lot of that amplification. And that, as an early stage company, you've got to tie the different pieces back to get the maximum yield and the maximum awareness out of that single announcement.
That sounds a lot like what we do at Instapage.
Well, that's the sign of a good marketing program.
Yeah, and Saranya, obviously, our VP of marketing here, worked underneath you for a little bit, so maybe we can give you some indirect credit for that as well.
I don't know about that.
Well, maybe. Another thing that I would love to get your perspective on is when it's most appropriate for SaaS companies, B2B SaaS companies, at the stage that you work with, when is it most appropriate to bring in some outside help? And what does that outside help really function to do very well? Because it's really easy to hire a consultant and then wonder why you hired them. There's really, really powerful ways that outside help and outside perspective, et cetera, can amplify your business. And this is something you're doing. So I feel like there's no better person to ask about this.
I kind of look at my job as being, I'm just successful when my job ends in 6 months. If I'm there after 6 months, then probably I'm not being successful because I'm going in there to basically help scale things and get things going. In a lot of cases, I'll actually help the companies hire. I'll help them basically set up programs, I'll help them set up infrastructure. But really, my measure of success is basically to transfer out of the organization within a certain period of time. And if I'm still there, then there's something probably wrong. Actually, I think that's a really great question that you're posing because I'm just thinking about some of the discussion we've had already. We talked a little bit about messaging and how it's really important to dial in that messaging right up front. So one organization I've recently worked with brought in an outside messaging group to basically help them define their messaging. A lot of organizations do this because, in fact, I think it's a best practice, frankly, because you're so close to it, you have a hard time being objective.
Totally.
But again, it all comes down to timing. When you're really super early on and you don't have a lot of repeatability in the business, you don't have enough pattern matching, if you will, to basically know that, hey, this really resonated or this really didn't. I really feel that kind of the first cut of that messaging needs to be done by the individuals who know the product and know the solution offering really well, and then going out there and testing and bringing it to market. After they've got a larger base of customers and they have enough experience in the marketplace, then I advocate very strongly. Yes, you do bring in that outside organization to help you hone that message and ensure that you're saying it in the right way so it best resonates with your target audience. But if you go there too early, you're most likely wasting your money. Yes, you're getting a lot of smart people that have tons of experience having developed messaging over the time, but you don't have enough familiarity with your audience at that point to really hone and dial it in. I don't really have a hard or fast rule that I've established, but I want to see a couple of sales to a couple dozen customers before I actually go with that outside agency and start working with them to basically refine and dial in that messaging. Think about another organization I've recently worked with. They're coming from their domain. They are it's actually in the accounting field, and they're providing a closed management software solution. And the company is founded by accountants. The company is made up with a bunch of former CPAs. I call them the island of misfit accountants.
Is this one of the investments from Toba?
It actually is. Yeah, I think maybe Rob I mentioned it. I'm actually
he did. He briefly mentioned it, and he mentioned this exact thing. How they all in this organization have something in that background.
They have tremendous domain expertise, which makes them have developed an incredible product that really works the way accountants do. And so I worked with them to engage an outside agency to help the messaging. And it was very interesting to watch the reactions, because when the agency came back with some of the results from the interviews with the customers and with some of the outside experts, there was a little bit almost disappointment, if you will, because there wasn't something net new. But then there was actually a very much change of opinion thereafter, because what they had done is they basically did all what they call corner rounding. And so they found out, okay, what is the best term to describe the space they play in? What are the top benefits that have the most impact with their target audience? And there was a measurement and a validation of these different spaces. And there's two things that the organization benefited from that had the largest impact by far. One was this consistent vernacular that everybody in the organization could basically describe the space they're playing in, their key benefits, and all essentially singing from the same hymn book. And then the second factor, of course, was the validation piece with the market, that this is indeed the benefits that organizations will receive. And this is more important than B. It's almost like A/B testing, the classic A/B testing.
Yeah.
But it's that former, which is the criticality. It's getting everybody across the organization on the same page, saying the same story. It gives you the consistency of your message across all your various assets. It gives you consistency of message of your BDRs on the phone in terms of how they pitch the solution. It even gives the consistency of the message internally of how an organization speaks with its customers when they're seeing internal communications, when they're basically following up on support issues. It's that rallying cry around that core message that then leads, again, to amplification. Mm-hmm. Boy, I think amplification seems to be the big word today.
It certainly does. I think it might work its way into the title of this episode. Speaking of amplification, where is all of this going? Maybe on a higher level, where is the amplification of your marketing efforts going to end up? What's it going to look like in 5, 10, however many years from now?
Yeah. When I always work with an organization early on, I kind of think about what it is I want to achieve. And if you want to think about it in like a metrics-driven way, I want my website to kind of crack the barrier down Alexa.com rating, cut in half every single year. And just keep on piling down. I want to have people coming to me, people to be aware of who I am and what I represent and why I'm different. And so one of the metrics I track as a marketing leader across my organization on a monthly and actually sometimes even a weekly basis is just my web traffic coming in and where it's coming from. That's probably the ultimate measure in terms of, are my efforts paying off? Again, this is really more around awareness metrics.
Sure.
But am I starting to basically develop a name for the space I represent? Am I cutting through the noise that I'm standing out and that people are aware of who I am? I look at also in terms of top search terms. Maybe my company name might not be the easiest one to spell or something like that. So I look at, how many people are trying to search for me based on my name.
Yep.
Misspellings as well, because that tells me that they're hearing about me. They're hearing about me from others. They're hearing about me from, if I'm selling to IT, from other IT managers. They're hearing me from the analyst community. They may hear reading about something in the press, but they're coming back to me.
When we're just about out of time, and I know that we're both very busy, so I want to respect your schedule. One thing I like to ask everybody who comes on the show is what we as marketers can do to help you.
I think all marketers can work on finding emotion in their message. That's what really resonates with an audience, and that's what really sells. And that's what actually makes it exciting too, to basically, when you can find in, you can basically connect in with that emotion, you're able to see that amplification really start to pick up and really go.
It's all about the heartstrings.
It is about the heartstrings, actually. And it's, when you work with B2B technology, sometimes that can be a little bit hard to dial into. And the organizations I've been that have been the most successful have been the ones who've been able to find out what is the pain they're addressing their end users and basically calling out that pain, making it much more personal and making it a much more direct connection.
Awesome. Wynn, once again, it was a pleasure having you in here. Thank you so much for coming to our office in your busy schedule, making some time for us, and I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Honored, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Here are some of the takeaways from our conversation with Wynn. Run your own marketing to start. In a startup or a small company, it might be tempting to hire outside temporary help to accomplish certain tasks. And while there are certain tasks that might be best left to freelancers, some responsibilities must be accomplished by founders or those who have the most intimate knowledge of the product. After laying the groundwork for your company's narrative, bringing in a third-party consultant can certainly provide you with the outside view that you will need to round the corners of your messaging and your branding. Your customers are your most important validation point. External validation of your product's value proposition is essential in order to be taken seriously for both B2B SaaS products and for the consumer landscape. One difference between B2B and B2C is that niche B2B products may have a smaller audience and less mainstream media presence. Among the most powerful entities for providing this validation are your existing customers. They've already experienced the value created by your product, and they can demonstrate success. Either way, having external validation from your customers is essential in addition to industry insiders, analysts, and even niche or mainstream media contacts. Your simplest metrics matter. The data that we have available to us as marketers is incredibly vast, with the scope of data getting even more specific and vast as technology improves. With the degree of granularity that we can apply to our data sets, it's tempting to customize the numbers to view really technical and obscure insights. However, there's still significant value in keeping your data simple. Something as basic as web traffic can be a very powerful indicator in the non-attributable sources for your growth. And that includes PR, that includes word-of-mouth marketing, and other things that might be very difficult to track. Definitely a pleasure having Wynn White in our office, and I am really excited to see what the companies that he's working with, what they get up to. In fact, having someone like Wynn is a really great way to see his work in action. So check out some of the companies that he's working with, see what they're up to, and see how they're going to change over the course of the next few months or whatever period of time it might be. They are on the show notes page, as with each and every episode, along with a complete transcript and the summary of this conversation. You'll find that at instapage.com/podcast. Next episode is very specifically about data, and I mean that quite literally. Daniel Shaliff, an incredibly experienced technical marketer from Domino Data Labs, is going to come over to the Instapage headquarters in San Francisco and say hello. And this guy, he's got a ton of different experience in leadership roles in the startup space, both in San Francisco and elsewhere, including time as a CEO, time as a CTO, head of marketing, and I think he's actually working on a product role right now. Really excited to have him on the show, and also very excited to share that conversation with you. In the meantime, if you'd like to say hello, please feel free to do so. My name is Ander, and you can reach me at ander@instapage.com. That's ANDER at instapage.com. We are very active on social media, and the rest of my colleagues would love to hear from you there as well. Come say hello to us on LinkedIn. Happy to chat, happy to answer your questions, and hear about how you are doing your marketing. All right, my fellow marketers, I am out for now. My name is Ander, marketing educator here at Instapage, and this is Advertising Influencers. Cheers to your future success, and cheers to better marketing. I will talk to you soon.
Advertising Influencers. Conversations with today's top-tier marketers from Silicon Valley and beyond. Powered by Instapage, the most powerful landing page solution.